Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we have a special treat. We are going to be talking about one of the greatest children's books that has come along in a very long time. It is called The Invention of Hugo Cabret, a novel in words and pictures by Brian Selznick, and it is published by Scholastic Press. And Brian, thanks for coming by.
Hi, Jim.
I like your publisher a lot, and I know they're very proud that your book opened as in the number one position on the New York Times Book Review children's book bestseller list. I'm very, very proud of that. And it's a wonderful company, but when it opens, as number one would think that they would know what the book is. But in their literature, so to speak, it says this: The Invention of Hugo Cabret isn't exactly a novel. It's not quite a picture book or a graphic novel or flip book or a movie, but a book that combines the elements of all these things. Here is a stunning cinematic tour de force from a boldly innovative storyteller, artist, and bookmaker. I must say they rescued themselves. When I started reading that, I was getting concerned. I mean, what's going on with these clowns?
Well, I'm afraid to say that I helped write the beginning of that piece. We were trying to decide what it was, and because it's a 544-page book with 300 pages of pictures, and the pictures help tell the story, we didn't quite know how to describe it, so we thought that maybe by saying a bunch of things that it's not would be helpful, but maybe we were wrong.
To position it. Well, I think on a more serious note, that's the kind of difficulty one gets in when one is trying to describe something that is unique. That, this hasn't been here before, now it's here. What exactly is it? Because you've push the envelope, all those crazy 21st century phrases. So, and seriously, you should be congratulated. And when I finished reading the book, I sat thinking, and I said to myself, only Selznick could write this book. Could only have been written by Brian Selznick for three, maybe four reasons. The first one is it required someone with respect and love for research and for presenting research straight up. And by that I mean not shaped or reduced for children. And you've always done that.
Oh, thank you.
And it goes on here.
Yeah, I love doing research, and I think the research that I've done has generally grown out of the story that I'm telling. And I think because this book has a lot to do with early cinema, I wanted to learn a lot about the early cinema and clockmaking and all these things that a lot of people early on had said to me, well, you're doing a book about French silent movies for kids? Like, that doesn't sound like the smartest idea. But because it's really...
I'm not going to that birthday party.
Well, it's really about this orphan named Hugo who lives on his own in the walls of a train station in Paris. And the things that are important to him, if I present it correctly, my editor told me that if it's important to Hugo, then it will be important to the reader. So the things that I then researched, the clockmaking, the movies, the life in Paris, all of those things were important to Hugo and were important to the story itself.
Yeah, and that was the second thing that I thought about, that you're the kind of writer and illustrator that you're not afraid of getting into a time and a place and an era and activities that are not household terms.
Yeah, I guess it's slightly selfish, is that these are the things that interest me, and so I have found that my audience tends to be 9 years old, and so but I'm first working on things that are really interesting to me, and a lot of the things that are interesting to me now grew out of what I was interested in when I was 9 and 10 years old, and so I think maybe that's part of why there's a connection with kids.
That's the third point, is that whatever you do, it seems to me you have these readers, the 9-year-old reader in mind, no matter how sophisticated the research might be. You grasp a period and create out of it a fascinating page-turning story for and about children.
Yeah, although it's funny because when I'm working, even though I'm fashioning the story and I'm writing it as carefully as I can, I'm not specifically thinking, will kids like this? I'm thinking, does this work for the story? Does the thing that's happening in the plot make sense? Is the thing that's happening to the main character making sense? And so it was actually really terrifying when the book was published and I had to give it to kids.
Well, here we are at the end of the first segment, and we really haven't gotten into the story of the invention of Hugo Cabret. We have people who will throw stones at us if we don't do that as soon as we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
The Invention of Hugo Cabret. That's the title. It is a novel in words and pictures. It is written and illustrated by Brian Selznick, published by Scholastic Press. We got all of that good stuff in. Publishers Weekly has said some nice things about it, which we will share in part. They say, "Here is a true masterpiece, an artful blending of narrative, illustration, and cinematic technique for a story as tantalizing as it is touching." Now, one of the reasons this story is tantalizing, in my opinion, is that it opens with 44 pages with no words on them. And you had to be talked into this by your editor, because there's another interview in Publishers Weekly where she recalls that a lot of this introductory matter you had beautifully written, and she said, throw that out and give it to me in illustrations.
Well, I had been looking at a lot of movies and wanting it to have a sort of cinematic introduction. So I thought, maybe I would have some pictures to help open the story. But I did get kind of attached to the 3 pages of beautiful writing that I had done for the opening.
Oh, those illustrators. They're all the same.
And so I thought, okay, well, I'll take out this one paragraph and make it some pictures. And then maybe I'll take out 2 paragraphs. And then Tracy Mack, the editor, who said this to me, said, no, take out all of that and replace it with all the pictures. Tell the whole thing with pictures in the beginning. And so as soon as you open the book, you're really plunged into this cinematic world. And you meet all of the main characters in the pictures, so that when the text starts on the 45th page, you have already moved way into the story.
You know something. I mean, it's incredible. And I think that those pages begin the symbiotic relationship between word and illustration. This is, again, this is not an illustrated book.
Right. Oh, that's great.
It's something other than that.
Yeah,
I mean,
because it's
they don't know what it is, and I don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is either.
But it is not an illustrated book.
Because it's like the book is serving in a way as the camera, and so you start and you see these images of the moon, and then the moon over Paris. Then you move into Paris, into the train station, and inside this train station, you find a boy in the crowd, and you follow the boy, and that boy is Hugo Cabret, and then he mysteriously moves off into one of the walls. He goes through an air vent in the wall, and then you continue down the hall like a camera. So we have followed him like a camera.
Let's describe Hugo. Hugo is an orphan, clock keeper, and thief who lives, as you were just saying, in the walls of a busy train station where his survival depends on secrets and anonymity. But when his world suddenly interlocks, and that's a well-chosen word, like the gears of the clocks he keeps, with an eccentric, bookish girl and a bitter old man who runs a toy booth at the train station, Hugo's undercover life and his most precious secret are put in jeopardy. A cryptic drawing, a treasured notebook, a stolen key, a mechanical man, and a hidden message from Hugo's dead father form the backbone of this intricate and tender mystery. Now, intricate it are, but it is not confusing. It is not difficult to follow. And again, I think it's because the symbiotic relationship between illustration and words.
I had hoped that at the end of reading the book, you wouldn't remember specifically which parts were told with pictures and which parts were told with words, that you would remember one single narrative starting at the beginning and moving through the end, but it's told with these two different art forms, with words and with pictures. And that's so the book's actually divided in half, and there's one mystery that is solved in the first half of the book, and then a second larger mystery that's solved in the second half of the book, and each half is divided.
I don't think we should go any further. They should go out and buy this big fat, how many page book?
544.
540. This is worth your money. I mean, this is it's not inexpensive.
I think I was told it's $7 a pound.
$7 a pound, 533 pages, $22.99, and only buy it if you're age 9 or up. we don't want to upset anybody at home. Now, the other thing that's important here, which you've kind of come in and out of it's movies, and the movies of what era? The beginning of the sound era.
Yeah, the book takes place in 1931, which is just after sound was introduced, specifically in 1928 with the jazz singer. But it also has a lot to do with the films of Georges Méliès, this magician turned filmmaker from the very beginning of the motion pictures in the late 1800s. And it all started with me seeing Trip to the Moon, the very first science fiction movie that was ever made. It was by Georges Méliès from 1902. And so that was really the inspiration for the beginning of the story. But then because the story takes place in 1931, those movies are also very important.
We'll talk some more about Georges Méliès. Pretty good, huh? Georges Méliès.
Oui, oui.
And the relationship of early movies to this wonderful tale. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. Our guest today, Brian Selznick. The title of his new book, The Invention of Hugo Cabret, a novel in words and pictures published by Scholastic Press. And you began your career, if you will, in books by working in a bookstore. And lo and behold, a fellow by the name of John Schwartz reviews your book in the New York Times Book Review last Sunday, and he knows you from whence.
It's pretty amazing.
That's
back in the late 80s.
Incredible. In 1991, he says, my wife and I wandered into Ior's Books for Children on the Upper West Side, looking to freshen the nightly round of bedtime stories. The Houdini box by Brian Selznick sat right by the cash register because Selznick was working at the store at the time. And he, the boss was smart. We'll sell a few books. The kid will never shut up about his book. We'll sell a lot of Houdini box, right?
It was nice to be a bookseller with a book for sale in the store.
I love the scene. I like it. Okay. Now we go on to more serious matters here. In the years since, Selznick has become known more for his artwork than for his writing, illustrating books like The Dinosaurs of Waterhouse Hawkins, featured on Conversations on the Coast, written by Barbara Curley, which book won a Caldecott honor in 2002. But he still has stories of his own to tell. And now here's a big one, The Invention of Hugo Cabret. It is wonderful. Take that overused word literally. Hugo Cabret evokes wonder. At more than 500 pages, its proportions seem Potteresque, yet it makes for quick reading because Selznick's amazing drawings take up so much of the book. That guy, he understands. He knows you. Now he knows you from way back when. He gets the book right. That's really nice.
It was very nice.
That is really, really nice. When you were talking to some students today, you tried to get across the point that the illustrations, if they're really doing their job, make it possible for the reader to experience seeing of objects the way Hugo is seeing or experiencing them.
Yeah,
that's a hell of a goal.
Well, it's actually quite simple because you end up seeing what Hugo sees when you are, so it's from his point of view very often, and also you are experiencing time the same way Hugo is sometimes. So if Hugo is waiting to find out what the automaton can write, and then instead of describing it, you have to flip through the pages as the automaton makes more marks on the paper that is in front of it, then you are waiting in the same way that Hugo is waiting to find out what this complicated machine can write, which is a big part of the plot. So you are literally in his shoes.
Yeah, you are there with him.
Yeah.
Did we define what an automaton is?
An automaton is a very complicated wind-up figure that were made originally by magicians very often, starting, I think, in the 1700s, basically just to evoke wonder, to fill people with amazement and to make them question what life is. There was a famous one called Vakusan's duck that could eat and go to the bathroom. And
excuse me?
That's what the duck should have said.
Did it play tic-tac-toe like Trillin's duck in the village?
That was another automaton, I think. But yeah, they were really amazing things. And then there were like figures, like mechanical figures that were like 2.5 feet tall that sat at desks that could write. There was one that could swing on the trapeze. There were birds in cages that could sing and move. They were very beautiful and complicated.
And many of these were created by magicians?
Yeah, magicians, or for magicians for use in their show. And then there was a magician named Jean-Robert Houdin, who was also a clockmaker. And so because of his background with clocks, he was able to make a lot of these very complicated figures. And in a book called Edison's Eve by Gabby Wood, which is about the history of these automata, I found out that Jean-Robert Houdin's automata collection ended up in the hands of Georges Méliès, the filmmaker that we talked about earlier. So that Méliès had this collection of these beautiful figures that he eventually donated to a museum where they were, unfortunately, where they were destroyed up in the attic by a leak in the roof and were thrown away.
Now, the other direction that you say in the book that magicians go or went was into film. Why was that?
It turns out a lot of early filmmakers were magicians, and I think they saw the connection between what they were doing on stage with what could happen on the screen.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was a lot of them put themselves out of business because it was much easier to make something disappear on camera than it was on stage, and so people started wanting to see these more amazing things on film, and it was harder to then lure them back to the theater to see live magic, and the cinema took off.
Yeah, and there were things that they could do on film that was similar to magic, like making things disappear,
exactly,
et cetera, et cetera. Well, don't let this book disappear. Please don't miss it. Go out and buy a couple of copies. You know a lot of kids, and they all should have it read to them or read it. It's called The Invention of Hugo Cabret. It's the best children's book we've ever had on the show. It's a novel in words and pictures. It's by Brian Selznick, published by Scholastic Press. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Thank you, Jim.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.